Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this really comforting expectation of absolute precision.
Right, it feels like engineering.
Exactly. I mean,
Uh-huh.
you fall, you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the black background, and the doctor just points at it. There's no debate.
It's entirely binary. The
Mhm.
bone is either fractured or it's intact. And we crave that kind of visible, easily categorized certainty in almost every aspect of our lives.
We really do. But then you step out of the physical realm and into the world of human psychology, into the messy landscape of intention, belief, and truth.
And suddenly that X-ray machine is utterly useless.
Completely useless. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is just incredibly murky. I mean, think about how we usually prove someone is lying in our modern society.
We treat it like a math equation.
Right. We check their spoken statement against the observable facts. If I say I have $10 in my pocket, but I only have 5,
The facts do not match the statement.
boom, it's a lie. But what if everything we thought we knew about the definition of a lie was, well, fundamentally flawed?
That's the big question.
Yeah, what if a perfectly factual statement,
Right.
a statement that is 100% objectively true in the real world, could still be the most destructive, heinous lie imaginable?
That paradox is exactly what we're examining today. It's a concept that completely upends our conventional legalistic understanding of truth and falsehood.
And it really forms the bedrock of a wildly different kind of social architecture.
It does.
So the roadmap for this fascinating and honestly quite jarring perspective comes from a set of exegetical lectures by Allama G. Parwez.
He takes a highly rational, systemic approach to interpreting the Quran, right?
Yes, specifically focusing today on Surah Al-Imran, verses 28 through 32. And the mission of our deep dive into these sources today is to explore how this ancient scriptural text is translated not into a loose collection of personal religious rituals or, private spiritual feelings.
Which is how we normally think of Scripture.
Exactly. But instead, it's translated into a highly structured, rigid blueprint for a unified, transparent, collective governance.
We're talking about the complete operational matrix of a social order here.
Yes, and it's a comprehensive framework that demands an astonishing level of psychological discipline from its participants.
We are essentially looking at the theoretical architecture of a society built entirely on absolute internal transparency.
And the total, uncompromising eradication of deceit at the psychological level.
Right.
Now, a quick but crucial note for you, our listener, before we get completely into the weeds here.
Always good to set the ground rules.
Yeah. The source materials we're analyzing today naturally touch upon deep theology, sociology, and statecraft. As always on this show, we are not taking any theological, sectarian, or political sides.
We are not here to endorse, validate, or debate the religious orthodoxy of these interpretations.
Right. Our job, purely and simply, is to act as your impartial guides. We're here to help you understand the specific philosophical and linguistic framework laid out in the text we've been provided.
We want to understand what the text is arguing, how it constructs its worldview, and the logical conclusions of its premises.
Exactly. We're treating the text as a systemic constitution. We're lifting the hood to see how the engine of this proposed society is built.
And the internal logic Parwez extracts from it is exceptionally rigorous.
It really is. So the absolute core foundation of this entire societal system rests on a concept that sounds almost impossibly modern and complete psychological synchronization.
Right.
The text categorizes all of humanity, like every single person, into 3 distinct groups. And what's immediately striking is that it doesn't divide them by race, by geography, by tribal affiliation, or even really by traditional religious labels in the way we usually conceive of them.
Now, it divides them entirely based on the alignment or the misalignment between their inner convictions, which the text calls the heart, and their outward expressions.
Which it calls the tongue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The source relies heavily on these linguistic and systemic classifications to define the citizenry of its model.
Okay, let's unpack this. What are the 3 groups?
The 3 groups are the mu'min, the kafir, and the munafiq.
Let's look at the baseline first, the mu'min.
So, mu'min is conventionally translated simply as a believer. However, Parwez's rational analysis strips away the passive, purely theological connotation of that word.
Right.
According to this systemic framework, a mu'min is not just someone who holds a faith. It's an individual who operates with absolute unshakable harmony between what resides in their heart and what they speak with their tongue.
Wow. So we're talking about a state of zero cognitive dissonance. There is literally no gap between the internal reality and the external presentation.
None whatsoever. They accept the societal system with complete peace and satisfaction of both heart and mind.
Okay.
Because their internal reality matches their external expression perfectly, they possess what the text considers a fully unified personality.
So they don't have to hide anything.
Exactly. They do not fear earthly powers, societal backlash, or political consequences when standing up for their systemic convictions, because their truth is integrated into their very cellular makeup.
That's intense.
It is. The text emphasizes that the unchanging ethical principle for this group is radical transparency. Truth, in this system, isn't merely a statement of fact. It's defined by the complete, unbreakable integration of inward belief and outward action.
That paints a picture of the ideal citizen for this proposed society. Someone who says what they mean and means exactly what they say, without any filtering for social expediency.
Right, but a society can't just be made up of ideal citizens.
Which brings us to the second group in the text's classification, the kafir. Traditionally, you hear this translated as infidel or non-believer, which carries a really heavy, often violently adversarial connotation in popular understanding.
But the systemic context Parwez extracts here is surprisingly pragmatic.
It really is highly pragmatic. The text defines the kuffar, that's the plural form, as those who openly and clearly declare their rejection of and opposition to the Quranic system.
They don't hide their disagreement at all.
No, they are the open rejectors. The text uses a specific phrase for them that translates roughly to transparent adversaries or open enemies.
And this kind of flips the conventional script, doesn't it?
It totally does. You'd naturally assume, within the context of a religious or ideological text, that the open rejector, the absolute vocal denier of the entire system, would be considered the ultimate villain, the absolute worst of the worst.
Right.
But the source material explicitly states that because their enmity is completely open and straightforward, the system does not condemn them with the same intense existential severity as it does the third group.
Because, from a pure governance and systems management perspective, an open enemy is a known variable.
You know exactly where they stand.
Exactly. The text points out that because their opposition is transparent, the believers, the operational body of the system, can clearly recognize them and take the necessary systemic precautions.
Right.
It's a threat, certainly, but it's a manageable threat. You can prepare for it, you can negotiate with it, you can defend against it.
Because open opposition, while fundamentally at odds with the divine system, lacks the insidious, destructive element of deceit. It's the classic cybersecurity problem. An open rejector, the kafir, in this specific framework, functions like a massive DDoS attack against a server network.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, it's hostile, it's actively trying to overwhelm your systems, and it's definitely a serious threat that requires a response. But crucially, you can see it coming.
Your monitoring systems light up.
Exactly. You know exactly which IP addresses are launching the attack, and you can deploy your firewalls to block them. It's a straightforward, symmetrical battle of defenses. You know who the attacker is.
But then we have the third group, the munafiq.
Correct.
And this is where the text brings down the absolute heaviest judgment.
Yeah, the munafiq is defined by a highly precise psychological condition, the dual personality.
According to the Quranic definition extracted by Parwez, a hypocrite is one who deliberately utters with their tongue what is fundamentally absent from their heart.
Yeah.
They maintain elaborate outward expressions of friendship, loyalty, or faith to the system, while internally harboring intense enmity, malice, and vengeance against it.
So following the cybersecurity analogy, if the open enemy is a DDoS attack, the munafiq is a Trojan horse.
That is the perfect mechanism to describe it. The Trojan horse completely bypasses the firewall because it intentionally disguises itself as friendly, legitimate, highly useful software.
You willingly invite it into your network.
Right. You might even give it administrative privileges because it looks like a loyal part of the system. And then once it's deeply embedded inside the secure perimeter,
it releases its payload.
Yes, and destroys the entire architecture from the core outward.
And the source material is unequivocal about the severity of this. It doesn't just say this behavior is like unethical or frowned upon.
No, it classifies this dual personality as the most severe, heinous crime imaginable within the Quranic social order.
It explicitly states it is a far worse crime than open, declared disbelief.
The rationale is entirely structural. I mean, any society simply cannot survive if its members maintain outward friendships while actively harboring secret enmities. The text points out that these individuals use false oaths and declarations of loyalty as a physical shield to protect the hidden malice in their hearts. They introduce fatal, undetectable deception into the system's operational matrix.
Wow.
Because they wrought the structure from within while smiling at you, the Quran places them in the absolute lowest, most severe depths of hell.
The ultimate punishment is reserved not for the open enemy on the battlefield, but for the smiling hypocrite at the dinner table.
Exactly.
Which brings us all the way back to the paradox we open with, the definition of a lie. The Arabic word used in the text is kizba. Now, as we established, our modern legalistic definition of a lie is simply a factual inaccuracy.
Right. I have 2 apples, I tell you I have 3. That's a lie.
But Parwez's rational analysis completely dismantles and redefines kiz for this societal framework.
He shifts the paradigm entirely from objective fact to subjective alignment. Parwez argues that kizb is not merely a factual inaccuracy.
Wait, so it's not about the facts?
Not at all. It is specifically and exclusively the deliberate disconnect between the heart and the tongue. It's the intentional creation of a dual personality.
So intent and psychological alignment are the only metrics that matter here. The source gives a really brilliant, clarifying example of this.
It does.
It states that if someone sincerely believes a false fact entirely due to a lack of knowledge or a misunderstanding, and they state that false fact as the truth, the text insists that is not kiz. They are not lying.
Let's ground that in a mundane example. Let's say you're sitting in a windowless room.
Yeah.
You genuinely believe, based on a faulty weather report you read earlier, that it's pouring rain outside.
Okay.
You turn to me and say, it is raining. But in reality, outside, there is a cloud in the sky. It's brilliantly sunny.
Right.
Under our modern standard, you told a lie because your statement didn't match reality. But under Parwez's systemic definition, you have not lied.
I made an honest, factual error out of ignorance.
Exactly. Why? Because your internal belief, your heart, and your external speech, your tongue, were in perfect synchronized alignment. You spoke exactly what you believed to be true.
There was no intent to deceive, no dual personality at play.
Right. The system can correct your ignorance, but it does not condemn your psychology.
The inverse of that is what truly breaks the brain, though. The text argues that a statement can be factually true, 100% objectively, undeniably accurate, and still be legally and morally categorized as a lie.
As kizb.
Right, if the speaker does not genuinely believe it internally.
The source material pulls a fascinating, highly specific example from Surah Al-Munafiqun, verse 63.1, to illustrate this exact paradox.
Tell us about that.
It sets the historical scene. A group of known hypocrites comes to the Prophet Muhammad in Medina. They stand before him and declare, "We testify that you are the messenger of God."
Okay.
Now, we have to pause and look at that statement within the context of the religion itself. That sentence is the ultimate factual truth. It's the foundational axiom of the entire Islamic faith.
Right. There is literally no truer statement a person could possibly utter in that specific room to that specific person. It's the core fact of the system.
And the text points out that the divine voice in the Quran even explicitly confirms the factual accuracy of their statement right there in the verse, saying, Allah knows that you are indeed his messenger.
So the fact is verified.
Verified. But then immediately after confirming the objective fact, the verse delivers a stunning verdict, and Allah testifies that the hypocrites are liars.
They are officially branded as liars for saying the single most truthful fact in their universe.
Because the factual truth of the statement is irrelevant to their psychological state. They did not believe it in their hearts.
Oh, wow.
They wielded a factual truth as a deceptive tool, a shield to infiltrate the system and gain proximity to the leadership. They deliberately spoke with their tongues what was completely absent from their hearts.
Therefore, in the eyes of the systemic framework, they are guilty of Qs.
Yes. Falsehood is an internal systemic rot, a deliberate psychological contradiction. Truth is not an objective reality you can point to on an X-ray.
It's verified only by the absolute synchronization of an individual's internal belief and external speech.
Exactly.
That is a profound shift. It completely eliminates the ability to hide behind technicalities or legal loopholes. You can never say, well, technically I didn't lie because the specific words I used were factually accurate if your core intent was to deceive.
Or if you were masking your true feelings.
Right. The system doesn't care about your clever phrasing. It cares about your psychological integration. But how does a state enforce that? You can't put a stethoscope to someone's soul and listen for hypocrisy.
You're hitting on the core vulnerability of any human-run system. Humans cannot read minds.
No, we can't.
And this is precisely where Parwez connects this psychological requirement to the universal, immutable laws of nature. Specifically, a concept the text refers to as the Law of Mukafat-e-Amal.
which translates to the law of the consequences of actions. Let's dive deep into Mukafat-e-Amal, because the way the text describes it, this isn't just a moral suggestion to be a good person. It describes it almost like a law of physics.
That is exactly the intended framework. Parwez's interpretation emphasizes that while you might successfully hide a dual personality from other human beings, you cannot hide it from the divine system's operational laws.
Right.
He cites verse 3.29, which says, "Whether you conceal what is in your breasts or reveal it, Allah knows it."
Now, a traditional surface-level reading often interprets this as a panopticon, right? Like an invisible man in the sky constantly watching your every move to tally up points.
Yes, but Parwez extracts a much more sophisticated systemic audit from this. He argues that the human self, the consciousness, which he calls the kuti, is subject to the exact same precise, immutable cause and effect measurements that govern the physical universe.
So in the same way that gravity inevitably acts on a physical body with mass, the law of Mukafat-e-Amal inevitably acts on the human psyche.
The synchronization of heart and tongue is presented as a non-negotiable law of nature for human development. Every action, every spoken word, and crucially, every hidden intent is an input into this system.
Okay.
The universe's laws process those inputs and inevitably produce a proportional consequence. Maintaining an outward display of friendship while secretly hiding internal enmity, living day in and day out as a dual personality, literally degrades and destroys the human self.
It fractures the psychological structure.
It does. The text argues that harmony between internal reality and external expression is the fundamental law required for developing the human self and attaining what it calls Hayat Yavedi.
Which translates to eternal life, or a permanently developed, indestructible state of being.
Right.
It makes me think of architectural engineering. Imagine a developer building a massive, towering skyscraper, but they know the foundation they poured has a massive structural crack right down the middle.
A fatal flaw.
Exactly. Outwardly, they finish the building, and it looks shiny and perfect. The glass reflects the sun beautifully, the lobby is imported Italian marble, the elevators are silent. The developer can stand outside and tell everyone, look at this perfect, flawless building.
And everyone walking by believes them because the facade is impeccable.
But internally, the stress vectors are completely misaligned. The physics of the structure are constantly at war with themselves. The building is holding a dual personality.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to see it.
It doesn't matter how good the marble looks. Eventually, the immutable laws of physics, gravity, load-bearing dynamics, wind shear are going to process that structural lie and bring the entire building down in a catastrophic collapse. You cannot trick physics with a nice facade.
No, you can't.
And what Parwez is arguing is that you cannot trick the universe's psychological laws with a polite smile and a firm handshake if your heart is actually full of malice. The sheer silent stress of maintaining that internal contradiction will inevitably collapse your kuti yourself.
That architectural analogy captures the mechanics perfectly. The universe's operational laws evaluate all phenomena, both the hidden structural cracks and the manifest marble lobbies.
Right.
The text points to verse 3.30, which describes a future state, a day of reckoning, where every single soul will be forced to confront the accumulated results of what it has done.
And what does it say?
It explicitly states that those who lived hypocritically, who maintained that structural lie, will see the catastrophic damage they have done to themselves. They will wish for a vast, insurmountable distance between themselves and the catastrophic results of their dual personalities.
Wow.
The tragic realization will be that their lifelong deceit didn't just fool their neighbors or their government. It fundamentally destroyed their own capacity to exist in a higher developed state.
Okay, so the foundation is laid. Absolute transparency is the baseline law of human development. You must align your heart and your tongue. You cannot harbor secret enmity while showing outward friendship. That's the ideal state.
That's the baseline.
But this immediately collides with a massive, glaring, practical problem in the real world. If the baseline is perfect, rigid honesty, how does this system expect its people to handle actual existential threats?
The reality check.
Right. What happens when a society or an individual living within the system faces a literal war or a tyrant? Doesn't basic survival justify a little strategic deception?
It's a fair question.
If an enemy is holding a sword to your throat and asks if you are loyal to the system, isn't it completely acceptable to fake a smile, lie, and pretend to be their friend just so you can live to fight another day?
You're stepping into perhaps one of the most highly controversial and paradigm-shifting arguments in the entirety of Parwez's source material. To answer that, we have to completely dismantle and reevaluate a deeply entrenched historical concept known as takaya.
Let's unpack the traditional view of Takaya first, so we understand exactly what Parwez is rebelling against.
So,
The text anchors this discussion in verse 3.28, which contains the specific Arabic phrase, ila and tataku minhum tukutan. Historically, how have traditional interpreters translated and applied that phrase?
well, historically, many traditional schools of thought have translated the word tukutan to justify the doctrine of takaya.
And what is that exactly?
Takaya, in the traditional conventional understanding, is a legal and theological permission granted to believers to actively hide their true faith or to feign friendship and loyalty with sworn enemies, specifically out of fear for their own safety or to protect their lives.
So it's essentially an escape hatch.
Yes, it's an allowance for expedient self-protection in times of extreme weakness. The logic is, if you're a marginalized group surrounded by powerful, violent enemies, God does not want you to be slaughtered pointlessly.
Makes sense.
Therefore, you are permitted to outwardly act like the enemy's friend, participate in their customs, and vocally deny your own faith, as long as you internally keep your true belief hidden safely in your heart.
Which, from a purely biological standpoint, sounds like basic human survival instinct. It makes logical sense. If the choice is tell the truth and die or lie and live, biology screams at us to lie.
Right.
But Parwez, according to this text, vehemently and categorically rejects this entire concept.
He absolutely tears it down to the studs. Parwez argues that sanctioning taqwa, legally allowing a believer to intentionally create a dual personality simply out of fear, destroys the very foundation of the entire Quranic system we just spent so much time
It's
establishing.
viewed as a massive contradiction.
Exactly. Think about the logical contradiction. We just established that the dual personality, the munafiq, is the most heinous, destructive crime in the entire system, far worse than open disbelief. It rocks the soul and collapses the kuti.
Right.
How could the very same constitutional text suddenly turn around and say, well, actually, if you're really scared for your physical life, go ahead and become a hypocrite to save your skin?
It would make the whole system incredibly fragile. It turns absolute truth into a luxury that you only practice when it's safe and convenient. If truth is the absolute synchronization of heart and tongue, an exception based on physical fear makes the whole concept meaningless. So, if Parwez completely rejects the idea of hiding your faith, how does he resolve the translation of that specific word, tukutan?
Good question.
If it doesn't mean takraya or expedient hiding, what does it legally mean in this framework?
Parwez bypasses centuries of traditional commentary and goes straight back to the root lexicography of the word. He argues that linguistically, tukutan does not mean hypocritical friendship, hiding, or deceit.
Okay, then what is it?
Functionally, it means taking rigorous, vigilant, and highly defensive precautions. He points to related Arabic terms used to explain it, like hazar or bikau, which mean taking a defensive distance or guarding oneself.
So it's not about blending in with the enemy to fool them, it's about building a visible fortress against them.
Precisely. The system demands that if you know someone is an open enemy to the state or the social order, you must maintain strict operational distance. You put up your defensive perimeters, you stay intensely vigilant, and you absolutely do not allow them into your inner circles where they can access your secrets or influence your policies.
You maintain a transparent, unapologetic, defensive posture.
You do not cozy up to them, smile in their faces, invite them into your home, and pretend to be their allies while secretly hating them in your heart. That behavior is the hypocritical dual personality, and it remains strictly universally forbidden regardless of how powerful the enemy is.
I'm picturing it like dealing with a lethal toxic hazard. Let's say there's a massive radiation leak in a facility.
Okay.
The traditional idea of takaya would be like walking into the highly radioactive room wearing street clothes, pretending the radiation is your friend, smiling, and just hoping your internal willpower keeps you from getting radiation sickness.
It's absurd when you put it like that.
Right. It's absurd. Parwez's definition of tukutan is acknowledging the lethal threat, maintaining a safe distance, putting on a heavy, visible lead hazmat suit, and building a concrete containment wall. You take rigorous, visible precautions to protect yourself. You do not engage in expedient deceit with the radiation.
That is exactly the distinction. And this leads to a much broader systemic prohibition within Parwez's framework, the absolute rejection of maslahat.
Which translates to expedient deceit or strategic compromise.
Right. The source text explicitly notes that man-made religious traditions, which it categorizes as mazhab, have historically fabricated endless narratives and legal rulings that permit lying under the guise of expediency, political necessity, or the greater good of protecting the religion itself.
It's the ultimate Machiavellian justification. The ends justify the means. If telling a lie protects the state from invasion or protects the church from persecution, then lying isn't just permissible, it suddenly becomes a moral obligation.
But Parwez argues that introducing this greater good framework is a fatal internal rot. The Quranic system, which he calls the din, demands a culture of absolute unyielding truth.
Right.
It refuses to accept any social, political, or religious fatwa, any legal ruling that claims lying is ever obligatory or permissible for strategic advantage. The means must be as pure as the ends.
The source material gets incredibly intense here to prove this point, pulling highly dramatic, specific examples from scripture and history. Let's start with a positive example the text highlights to show what this looks like in practice, the story of Pharaoh's sorcerers.
This is a powerful cinematic narrative used by Parwez to illustrate the terrifying courage of conviction required by this system. The text sets the scene in the royal court of Pharaoh.
Right.
Now, Pharaoh isn't just a king. He is an absolute tyrannical dictator who claims divinity. His power over life and death is unquestioned.
The ultimate authority.
Yes. He has summoned his greatest, most elite sorcerers to publicly defeat and humiliate Moses. The stakes are incredibly high, and Pharaoh has promised these sorcerers immense wealth, status, and proximity to his absolute power if they win.
But then something happens.
Right. During the confrontation, when the sorcerers witness the reality of Moses' message, they experience a sudden, complete internal paradigm shift. Their hearts instantly recognize the truth of the divine system.
And this is the exact crucible moment. They are standing literally feet away from an absolute dictator with an army at his back. They know definitively that contradicting him in public means certain, agonizing death.
Exactly.
This is the exact textbook scenario where the traditional concept of Takaya would scream at them, hide your faith. Pretend you still support Pharaoh, nod your heads, collect your reward, go home safely, and practice your new belief in secret so you don't get slaughtered.
But they do not do that. Because they have instantly become mu'min, true believers whose hearts and tongues must align by cosmic law, they openly, loudly declare their new faith right there in the center of the court.
Wow.
The source text details Pharaoh's furious, violent reaction. He has just threatened to kill them. He threatens them with horrific torture, crucifixion, and having their hands and feet amputated on opposite sides.
It's a threat of maximum biological terror.
Yet the sorcerers reply, essentially, do whatever you want to our bodies. Your power only extends to the biology of this physical life. We do not care.
They actively chose the absolute synchronization of their internal truth with their outward speech, even while staring directly into the face of horrific torture and death.
And Parwez argues that because of this complete, uncompromising psychological integrity, they attained Hayat age of 80, eternal life. They became the ultimate, timeless model of transparent courage. They proved that the kuti cannot be broken by physical fear.
That is a stunning, heroic example. But the text does not stop at highlighting heroes. It actively goes on the offensive.
It really does.
It attacks deeply held traditional narratives that it claims have fabricated stories of prophets themselves lying for expediency. We need to pause here because for a lot of listeners with a theological background, saying an accepted historical narrative about a prophet is a fabrication is a massive, highly controversial claim.
Absolutely.
That's a foundational earthquake for traditional theology. Why does Parwez feel he has to go that far?
He goes that far because if a systemic flaw is introduced at the very top by the prophets themselves, the entire system collapses. Parwez explicitly attacks a very famous, widely circulated traditional story found in some historical collections that claims the prophet Abraham lied 3 distinct times for the sake of religion.
Right.
According to the traditional narrative, these lies were told to protect himself or his wife from a tyrant, or to prove a strategic point about the foolishness of idolatry.
The tradition claims one of the greatest, most revered prophets in history lied, and they just accept that.
Yes, the traditional view often frames these not as sins, but as necessary or expedient lies, instances of maslahat. The logic is that they were supposedly told to protect the divine mission, so they were justified.
What Parwez?
But Parwez, operating strictly from his systemic framework, calls this an insulting, destructive fabrication. He points out that the Quran itself specifically gives Abraham the title of Siddiq, which translates to the absolutely truthful one, the one who perfectly confirms the truth.
Oh, interesting.
Parwez asked a logical question. How can the absolutely truthful one tell three calculated lies? He argues that if a prophet, the very messenger and embodiment of the divine system, can lie whenever it is politically expedient, then the floodgates are wide open for every king, politician, and citizen to lie whenever they personally feel it's necessary for the greater good.
It destroys the core credential of prophethood.
Exactly.
If the foundation of the house is built on an expedient lie, the whole structure of truth collapses. He's saying you cannot defend the system by breaking the fundamental law of the system. The text also brings up a very specific, gritty narrative about the assassination of a man named Ka'b bin Ashraf. Can you walk us through the mechanics of that argument?
This is another instance where Parwez strongly, almost aggressively, critiques accepted historical tradition. The traditional story, found in historical texts, claims that Ka'b bin Ashraf was a dangerous enemy of the nascent state in Medina, actively inciting violence.
Okay.
The narrative claims that the Prophet Muhammad allowed his followers to use deliberate deceit to go to Ka'b under the guise of false friendship, complain about the Prophet to gain Ka'b's trust, and then use that hypocritical proximity specifically to assassinate him.
So the tradition claims the Prophet actively sanctioned the ultimate dual personality, ordering his men to fake friendship to get physically close enough to kill a political enemy. It's essentially a state-sponsored Trojan horse.
Exactly. And Parwez is utterly horrified by this narrative. He argues it is a complete malicious fabrication that contradicts the entire operational matrix of the Quranic state.
Because it uses the tools of the hypocrite.
Yes. The system demands that enemies be dealt with openly, transparently, and legally, not through deceitful, covert assassinations disguised as friendship. He argues that attributing such expedient deceit to the Prophet is a grievous insult.
Right.
He notes that even the Prophet's absolute worst enemies in history, people like Abu Sufyan before his conversion, publicly acknowledged the Prophet's character was completely transparent and fundamentally devoid of deceit or treachery. The system cannot utilize the tools of the hypocrite to defeat its enemies.
Okay, I understand the philosophical purity of this, but again, I have to push back hard on behalf of anyone listening who lives in the real world.
Sure.
Logically, what Parwez is demanding feels superhuman, almost reckless for his state apparatus. How can a societal system demand that its citizens literally choose crucifixion, like the sorcerers, rather than just tell a strategic lie?
It seems entirely impractical for the survival of a state.
Yeah, if your secret agents can't lie, how do you have intelligence gathering? If you can't deceive the enemy, how do you win a war?
You're looking at it through the lens of physical survival at all costs, which is how modern states operate. But Parwez argues the system demands a fundamental shift in perspective regarding what you fear and what you prioritize.
Okay.
The text analyzes a specific phrase in verse 3.28. Wa yuhaddukumullahu nafsahu, which roughly translates to, and Allah warns you of himself.
Honestly, that sounds terrifying. Fearing God sounds infinitely worse than fearing a dictator's sword.
It does if you view God as a bigger, scarier dictator. But Parwez's rational extraction changes the tone completely. He links this specific warning to the concept of Rauf, which translates to deep paternal affection and compassion.
Okay, that's different.
He says God is not warning humanity as a tyrant trying to terrify them into submission. He is warning them with paternal affection about the immutable, unforgiving laws of cause and effect, the law of Mukafat-e-Amal we discussed earlier.
It's the hot stove analogy.
Yes, expand on that.
When a parent looks at a toddler and warns them, do not touch the hot stove, I am warning you, the parent isn't threatening to hurt the child. The parent isn't going to burn the child. The parent is warning the child about the natural, immutable law of heat transfer. If you touch the glowing red metal, the physics of the universe dictate that your skin will burn.
Exactly.
The parent is acting entirely out of protective, Rauf love, trying to save the child from the inevitable consequences of the universe's laws.
Exactly. So within this system, the divine warning is essentially, do not fear the dictator's sword, because physical death is merely the end of the biological timeline. It does not destroy your cootie.
Wow.
Instead, fear the psychological destruction of your own self, which happens inevitably by cosmic law when you live a life of deceit. The universe's laws will obliterate the potential of those who rely on a dual personality.
So the loving warning is, do not touch the hot stove of hypocrisy.
Right, because it will burn your soul to ash, and no expedient geopolitical victory, no temporary survival is worth that permanent destruction.
You maintain your psychological integrity and take vigilant, open precautions, Hazara rather than acting out of cowardice and destroying your own structural foundation.
Precisely.
Okay. So we've spent this entire time talking about the defensive walls of this society. We know what the system strictly prohibits. It prohibits the disconnect between heart and tongue. It prohibits the dual personality.
It absolutely forbids hiding your beliefs out of fear, and it completely rejects any historical or legal allowance for expedient lies or strategic deceit. Everything must be transparent, unified, and courageous.
But a society cannot simply be built on a list of thou shalt nots and defensive posturing.
Right, it needs an engine.
Exactly. If transparency and distance from enemies are the walls of the society, what is the engine inside? What is the positive binding glue that holds these perfectly honest, radically transparent people together in a functioning state?
That crucial question brings us to the final major paradigm shift in Parwez's lectures, and perhaps the most profound redefinition in the entire source text, the reevaluation of the concept of hub or love, and how that specific concept forms the actual practical architecture of the state.
Let's look at the text. Verse 3.31 contains the phrase, In kuntum tuhibun Allah. Traditionally, this is universally translated as, if you love Allah, or if you love God.
Right.
And in almost all modern religious contexts, that word love is heavily loaded with sentimentality, emotion, and mysticism.
Very much so. The traditional view promotes a highly sentimental, mystical, or romanticized love for the unseen creator. This is the kind of love that is often pursued through isolated chanting, monasticism, asceticism, or seeking an ecstatic spiritual high alone in a private room or on a mountaintop.
It's very private.
It is framed as a deeply emotional, entirely individual and private experience between the human and the divine.
But Parwez, applying his consistently rational systemic lens, argues that this traditional view is fundamentally biologically impossible.
He does. He states unequivocally that it is a psychological and biological impossibility for a human being to feel sentimental, emotional love for an unseen, formless, and entirely abstract entity.
I can hear people instantly objecting to that. People will say, what are you talking about? I absolutely feel a deep emotional love for the divine. I cry in prayer. I feel a warmth in my chest.
Sure, people feel things.
But the source is arguing that human emotion requires tangible, physical connection or comprehensible form. You cannot love an abstract concept of the creator in the exact same biological, sentimental way you love your spouse, or a child that you can physically hold in your arms, or a friend whose face you can see.
Exactly. Sentimentality requires physical form. Human emotions are tethered to human senses.
Right.
So Parwez goes back to the linguistic roots once again to find what the text actually demands. He looked at the root letters of the word hub, the Arabic letters ha, ba, and ba.
Okay.
Functionally, in classical Arabic lexicography, this root does not mean a fluttery, warm feeling in your chest. It means to hold firmly, to remain steadfast, and to strictly, unwaveringly adhere to something. The specific Arabic terms used to define the root are kamsuk or atisam.
So, if it's not sentimental love, and the root is about holding firm, it's essentially an action verb. It means compliance. It means legal adherence.
Precisely. Therefore, loving God in this specific Quranic framework means strict, practical, visible adherence to his divine laws. It is not an invisible, unquantifiable emotional state. It is a visible, steadfast obedience to a legislative system.
Wow.
And this leads directly to a critical, foundational distinction that Parwez makes throughout these lectures, a distinction that explains the socio-economic mechanics of this state, the difference between din and mazhab.
Din versus mazhab. This seems completely central to his whole thesis. Let's spend some real time breaking that down because we tend to use those words interchangeably in casual conversation.
We do, but in Parwez's systemic dictionary, they're practically opposites. Mazhab is translated as religion.
Okay.
In Parwez's view, religion is a man-made construct that fundamentally fragments people. It turns the pursuit of the divine into an entirely individualistic, private endeavor.
Right.
In a mazhab, people isolate themselves into competing sects. They retreat into monasteries or private devotionals, and they try to cultivate that sentimental feeling of love for God entirely on their own to secure their personal salvation in the afterlife.
It's a private transaction between the individual and the unseen. It has no bearing on the economy or the legal code of the society.
Exactly. But din is different. Din translates to a system of life or a comprehensive social order. Parwez argues that the divine laws in the Quran are not just spiritual platitudes to make you feel good. They are actual, gritty, socio-economic and geopolitical directives.
They govern the real world.
Right. They dictate how wealth is distributed, how justice is administered, how foreign policy is conducted. You cannot implement a societal law by sitting alone in a cave feeling spiritual.
No, you can't.
Therefore, adherence to God Hub cannot be individualistic. It strictly requires collective adherence to a central authority that administers those laws. The text calls this central hub the Markaz-e-Amal.
Okay, let's explore the mechanics of that. If love means strict adherence to the laws administered by the Markaz-e-Amal, how does the divine love back?
That's the logical next step.
Right. The verse says, Allah will love you in return. If it's not sentimental love from humans to God, it logically cannot be sentimental, emotional love from God down to humans, right?
Correct. The system must remain consistent. And here, the linguistic connection is quite beautiful and highly practical. The root hub, meaning adherence, is directly linguistically related to the word hab, which means a physical seed or a grain.
Oh, wow, a seed.
The expert analysis here is that when believers adhere to the system, when they collectively plant the seed of compliance and effort, the divine system reciprocates. God's love in return, the phrase yubib kumula, means he acts as a guardian over that seed. The specific word used is wali.
And wali is usually translated loosely as friend, right?
Traditionally, yes. But functionally, in the context of statecraft and systems, it means an overseer, a protector, an administrative guardian. When God, operating through the laws of the system, is the wali, the system actively oversees human development. It protects human potentials and nurtures them to full maturity, exactly the same way a diligent farmer acts as a guardian to a seed, a hab.
The farmer waters it, protects it from pests, and nurtures it until it becomes a thriving, ripe, productive crop.
Exactly. Divine love, therefore, is not a feeling. It's the provision of a secure, transparent, socio-economic environment where human potential can maximize.
That completely changes the paradigm of what it means to be a good person in this framework.
It really does.
It sounds like the difference between claiming to love your country by just sitting in your bedroom, wrapping yourself in a flag, feeling warm, patriotic fuzzies while listening to the national anthem, versus actually paying your taxes honestly, following traffic laws, volunteering at the local shelter, and actively contributing to the physical infrastructure of the community.
That is a perfect, highly accurate analogy for Din.
The text is saying love is an action verb, and a strictly collective one at that. You can't just feel it, you have to do it, and you have to do it together in a structured way.
And the text provides a literal physical demonstration of this collective action required by the concept of salat.
Salat is the ritual prayer, the daily prayers that Muslims perform.
Yes, but again, Parwez elevates it entirely from a mere religious ritual to something much more profound regarding statecraft. He describes salat as the miniature form of the broader Quranic societal organization. It's a daily physical drill.
The miniature form. How does a prayer represent a government structure?
Think about the physical mechanics of how salat is performed in a congregation. It is a highly visible, physical manifestation of collective discipline. You have dozens or hundreds or thousands of individuals all standing shoulder to shoulder in perfectly straight, unbroken lines. They are coordinating their physical actions entirely behind a single central leader, the imam. When the imam bows, everyone bows simultaneously. When the imam stands, everyone stands. Imagine if there was no central coordination. If individuals just started bowing, standing, and prostrating whenever they felt their own personal, sentimental urge to do so.
It would be absolute chaos. It would look ridiculous. It would just be a room full of people randomly popping up and down, bumping into each other. There would be no unity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Salat physically trains the society that individual, uncoordinated actions, no matter how well-intentioned or spiritually motivated, cause internal chaos.
Wow.
It demonstrates 5 times a day that the divine laws must be followed in a unified, functioning state behind a central authority. And interestingly, the text notes a crucial democratic element.
Oh, really?
Yes. If the imam makes a mistake during the prayer, if he forgets a verse or performs an action out of order, the congregation does not blindly follow the error. They collectively and vocally correct him, and they rectify the error together without breaking the formation.
It's a drill in civic discipline, alignment with the law, and collective correction of the leadership.
Exactly.
But this raises a really important modern question. If the system is this intensely focused on centralized collective action and rigid adherence, what happens to the concept of individual interpretation? You know, the very modern idea that I have my truth, you have yours, and we can all find our own path to God.
Within this specific constitutional framework, that concept is considered highly destructive treason.
Treason.
Yes. The text looks at verse 3.32, which issues a clear command: obey Allah and the Messenger.
Now, traditionally, people might see that as two separate, distinct sources of authority. Obey the Quran for Allah and obey the Hadith, the secondary historical traditions, for the Messenger. Two different rule books.
But Parwez argues against that from a strict grammatical and systemic standpoint. He points out that the Quran frequently uses a singular pronoun for them in certain contexts.
Well, singular.
Because they do not represent two separate competing sources of legislation requiring divided loyalties. They represent one unified constitutional authority, the divine law, which is all enacted and enforced in real time through the central state authority, which is the messenger, or his successors in governance.
So to put it in modern political terms, it's the legislative branch and the executive branch functioning seamlessly as one unified sovereign power, the Constitution and the president acting in perfect accord.
Yes. And because of this unified structure, the mechanics of rejection are very clear. To turn away from this collective, disciplined social order, to intentionally fragment into sects, to create your own individualistic versions of obedience, which is exactly what the text says mazhab or religion does, is literally defined as kufr.
Rejection.
And shirk, polytheism. By fracturing the unified state authority into multiple competing religious sects, you are destroying the systemic adherence that the Quran demands.
You are introducing multiple authorities where there should only be one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You are, to use the earlier analogy, killing the seed of human potential before it can grow into a crop, because you have broken the system designed to nurture it.
Okay. This has been an incredibly deep, challenging dive into a profoundly different way of looking at very familiar concepts. We've covered a massive amount of philosophical ground today. Let's pull back and synthesize exactly what we've learned from these exegetical lectures by Allama G. Parwez on Surah Al-Imran. We set out to understand how this text functions not as a prayer book, but as a blueprint for governance.
And we found a system utterly obsessed with psychological integrity, radical transparency, and unified collective action.
Right. So the key takeaways, the non-negotiable action items for society built on this framework. Number one, you must completely eradicate the dual personality. The absolute worst crime imaginable is a disconnect between the heart and the tongue. What you feel internally must match what you say externally. Number two, you must absolutely reject the concept of expedient deceit. Lying is never, ever justified by physical fear, political necessity, or even to protect the religion itself. Truth is a cosmic law, and it is non-negotiable, even in the face of torture, as demonstrated by Pharaoh's sorcerers.
And number three, we must radically redefine and operationalize divine love. It's not an isolated, mystical feeling in your heart. Hub is steadfast, active adherence to the law. It requires abandoning fragmented religious sects and proving devotion by collectively following a unified central authority.
Operating much like the disciplined rows of a congregation in prayer, nurturing the seed of human potential.
Beautifully summarized.
I want you to consider your own life for a moment, listener. Bring this ancient, rigid text directly into your modern reality. Look closely at your daily interactions. Where are you actively maintaining a dual personality?
It's a tough question.
Think about your workplace, your community board, maybe even your own family dynamic. Are you harboring intense enmities, deep resentments, or fundamental disagreements internally, while outwardly faking a polite smile and nodding along just out of social expediency?
Are you playing the corporate game, saying exactly what the boss wants to hear, while fundamentally disagreeing in your heart?
The text we examine today argues that this isn't just a polite social necessity or a clever survival tactic, it's a fatal contradiction. It argues that this daily hypocrisy is slowly, inevitably destroying your own psychological self, your kuti.
It forces us to ask a very uncomfortable question. Is the chronic friction, anxiety, and burnout we feel in our daily modern lives actually the sheer psychological stress of maintaining that facade? The text challenges us to realize that true, lasting peace only comes from absolute, uncompromising internal alignment.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering, and frankly terrifying thought experiment to explore on your own. Imagine if the system were magically implemented globally overnight. What if some cosmic switch flipped tomorrow morning and complete psychological transparency became the absolute enforced law of nature? What if every single human being's heart and tongue were suddenly forced into perfect synchronization? No more white lies, no more polite fictions, no more diplomatic doublespeak, no more hiding behind a smile.
Every hidden thought, every secret resentment, instantly became spoken truth.
Would our modern civilization, built as it is on endless layers of strategic expediency, polite fictions, and social masking, instantly collapse under the weight of that brutal, unfiltered honesty?
Yeah.
Or would that catastrophic collapse be the only possible way to clear away the rot, destroy the illusions, and finally build a foundation for true, lasting, genuine peace?
If the X-ray machine of truth was suddenly turned on for everyone all at once, the initial results might shatter us completely before they ever have a chance to heal us.
But at least the jagged white line would finally be clear. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We will see you next time.